encryption at the same time. Perfect. On behalf of my team and I, our thoughts are with the devastated communities and nations that are affected by the wildfires in BC. And with that, specifically for the majority of my team, we're grateful to live and work and play on the lands of the Lekwungen people, also known as Songhees, Esquimalt, and Beecher Bay First Nation communities. So, as I mentioned, this meeting will be recorded and shared. We're going to walk you through 3 segments. I'll be walking you through the business overview. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Zoran Samji. I'm the product owner for this product. And John Sharman will be covering the developer overview. And Nitin Shekhar, Nitin, you can help me with your last name right now for a second.
It's Nitin Shekhar Kuruba.
Thank you. Is going to walk us through developer deep dive. We are going to be using, there's 3 segments to this overview that we're really excited to give to you all. We're going to be making use of AI, a recorded real voice, and then a live voice. If you want, you can make comments on that after. We will be asking for feedback towards the end. And I also wanted to give some kudos to this team, especially for those team members that you will not be hearing for. So Avneet Aurora for all of her innovative work with the videos that you're going to see. Also with Tien Zhang for keeping us focused and setting up the meetings and making us not lose our goal. And Marco Villeneuve with all of the expertise he always provides to us. So with that, questions are encouraged to be put into the chat. And at the end of this overview, we will also open it up for verbal questions. So with that, I am going to include my computer sound and start our first video or portion of the business overview about OpenID Connect or OIDC as it relates to our product, the common hosted single sign-on. Oops, I don't know if you guys can see everything. I should double check that. Can you all see my screen now? Okay, and
Yes.
if you can't hear, let me know ASAP so I can adjust it.
Welcome to Common Hosted Single Sign-On. As a public servant, do you empathize with your users who are overwhelmed by remembering usernames and passwords for different government websites? Meet Max. He's a dedicated public servant who wants to help build modern, easy-to-use applications and products. With Pathfinder Single Sign-On, Max can provide an easy way for his users to log into their government apps with just one click. The Pathfinder SSO service consists of 2 offerings, Standard and Custom. Standard Realm, over 90% of our current clients make use of our Standard Realm. And the best part, your team focuses on your application and we give you a configuration to use. We provide self-registration, 20-minute access to a development, test, and production environment, default settings, architecture best practices, access to developer support, 24/7 site reliability monitoring, continuous improvement and bug fixes. Your team doesn't need to do any heavy lifting. Custom Realm, if your application has specific needs that don't fit our standard service, we also offer our custom service based on configuring you a custom realm. Please reach out to us if you plan to pursue this path. We will provide you with advice and best practices to set it up. Note your team will have to configure it for yourself. We are hands-off. Your responsibilities include governance model and decisions, migration of project teams that move ministries, access considerations, infrastructure code for environment promotion, have a long-term plan for DevOps or technical support. Pathfinder Single Sign-On uses Keycloak, which acts as an identity broker. It uses OpenID Connect protocols to enable teams' easy authentication. For example, Keycloak seamlessly connects to IDAR, BCUID, and BC Services card. How does Keycloak integrate with our single sign-on service? First, developers set up integrations with identity providers. Developers visit the CSS app to complete their integration request. Next, end users log into their applications. End users enter their credentials through an identity provider to log into the application. And there you have it. Common hosted single sign-on, a terrific service that simplifies your online life and keeps you secure.
And so with that, I'll lean on Tien to give the link to our CSS app, which is your first step in order to go in and make the request for the integration with us. The reason many of you have joined us today is because we are trying to be more developer focused. So that's a business overview of our service. I'm going to also give a little bit of a business overview as to why we make use of the OIDC protocol and why it's important for the different players in your teams, be it product owner, scrum master, or developer, to make use of it. So I'm going to get into the next video, which I need to full screen for you all. Oh, 1 second, please, and I'll get back here and get this one started now.
As a product owner, I care about OIDC because login is one small portion of my product, but it is crucial for my users to get into the app properly. OpenID Connect is a modern technology that enables applications to have login options for multiple identity providers. If I want to use the Pathfinder SSO service, I use OIDC. Understanding the high-level bits of OIDC helps build user stories that convey the correct information to my team or find the right resources to implement it. As I look to building my product, I need to consider the following things. Who can access? What can they access? How much login security is needed? Which identity providers do I need? Is there someone on my team who can integrate my product with what the Pathfinder SSO team provides?
As a Scrum Master, I care about OIDC so I can efficiently communicate features with business team members and technical details with architects and developers. I help create value by answering questions like, who can access? What can they access? How is our product secure? How are we using the protocol? And what is our system architecture? Which identity providers do I need? What are the constraints on the attributes received after login?
As a DevOps, I care about OIDC because the details about OpenID Connect enable me to code a product with the best coding and security practices. I want to avoid any vulnerabilities in the application. I create value by answering, which authentication flow do I need to keep my app secure? Are there some security best practices that I can follow? Which identity providers do I need? What do I need to learn? Which libraries? How do I contribute back to the SSO community? To learn more, you can visit our example repo at github.com/bcgov/keycloak example apps.
So with that, I'm kind of following the comments in the thread too, and thanks, Tian, for putting that link in. As a product owner, when I started to learn this space, there's a balance of what's my business need versus what do I need to know as a product owner from the technical perspective. So that being said, I am going to also just bring up, again, depending on your team, you may look at our example repo and use the IDEs that your practices have set up in your ministry, in your branch, by your DevOps team. But what I'm going to end up using is Visual Studio Code to show how I'm taking an example that we put into the repo here. And I am, as my team knows, I call myself the wannabe developer. I want to know just enough to get the experience of what our clients have. And so what I've done is downloaded the repo, and I'm following the README. I know that I have this environment file that I need to configure. And so I have the CSS app where I end up getting an installation JSON file, which holds all this information. And it's indicated here in the prereqs. So I configure my JSON file in this way, and then I come back down here and I say, all right, I need to get to the right folder, which is going to be under examples in OIDC. And I'll just double check here. And I'm going to follow the instructions here, which is basically run my npm run start. And what will end up happening is that configuration file that I had set now allows me to set up a login, which I could then log in with. And oh, of course, that has to happen. Oh, third time's a charm. And this is the example app that we have posted up there. So if I can do it, I'd like to think that we are setting the building up blocks for a lot of the team members on this call to be able to do that. So with that said, again, I'm taking that business lens. I'm going to now hand it over to John to help give the developer overview.
All right, so I'm going to focus on more the use case for a developer that's just been given the task to implement login functionality in an app. Still relatively low technical approach, but Nitin will be addressing the more technical example. So conclude sound. Let me know if you can't hear anything. Hello and welcome to your first authentic decision. The goal of this presentation is a quick intro to the concept of authentication, authorization, the like, and how you, as a developer who's been given a task to add authentication to an app, how you can get started, where to begin, what you need to know. So let's get started. Your product owner one day comes to you and says, make my product have a login. So like any good developer, you log on to Stack Overflow and see what people are talking about. You'll quickly come into some concepts like, what is authentication and authorization? What is OAuth 2 and OIDC? Where does Keycloak fit into all of this? And how do I pick the right flows to use for my apps? So what we're going to cover is a very high level intro to these concepts, a set of recommendations based on your app's infrastructure, and some links and resources that we found useful. This isn't meant to be like a hard technical introduction. It's more of a high level. So let's get started. Authentication versus authorization. Despite the fact that the names sound similar and it's easy to mix them up. Authentication is used to verify that users really are who they represent themselves to be, while authorization is used to grant the user permissions to access different levels of information and to perform specific functions depending on the rules that have been established for different types of users. A good way to think of this is an ID card versus a key to a room as an analogy. What problems are we trying to solve with OIDC? Well, firstly, your app no longer needs to manage a user's credentials. In the old days, when you wanted a login functionality on your website, your users would have to log in and their password and username would be stored in your database. That's no longer the case with OIDC. Secondly, because your user never exposes their credentials to the app they're logging into, it's more secure for them as well. An added advantage of outsourcing this login functionality to another service is that subject matter experts handle the login process, meaning they specialize in these identity and login flows, which significantly reduces the chance of human error exposing these credentials. The next concept of interest is the OAuth 2 flow. OAuth 2 is a standard that defines the best practice for integrating an app or client with a trusted identity provider or IDP. For example, IDER is a trusted identity provider in the BC Public Service. A user is redirected from the client site to an authentication server. There, they enter their credentials and are redirected back to a client with an access token in tow. That access token can now be submitted with a resource request, and once the token is verified as valid, the resource is returned. Notice that the user never submitted their credentials to the client, only to the OAuth server. OpenID Connect is just an extra wrapper on the OAuth 2 standard. It allows an ID token to be passed along with those authorization tokens mentioned before, including things like GUID, name, profile photo, stuff like that. Um, you can actually fake an OIDC flow using only OAuth 2, but it's just simpler to do so with OIDC. Because OIDC is an extension of OAuth 2, OIDC can do everything OAuth 2 can. So here's an example of that ID token being passed back during an OpenID authentication, whereas with OAuth 2, you can pass it back as a specific key. We've gotten some of the basic concepts out of the way, which means now we can get to the decision making. The important thing to realize is that standard doesn't mean unique. For example, there's no single best way to build an app. What kind of database do you use? Whether or not there's a backend, what tech stack or language to code in? Those are all decisions that have to be made based on your business needs. So why would you expect there to be a single best authentication flow for all of these different types of apps? This is where the CSS app users will have to start making decisions when using the CSS app to create an integration. We are going to cover 3 common use cases here. Question 1, do you have a backend? If not, you'll need to use a public client, ideally with a PKCE flow. When the browser talks directly to the authentication server, or Keycloak in this case, the browser can't securely store the secrets necessary for a confidential flow. Proof key code exchange can help mitigate these risks by preventing malicious sites from stealing your tokens. A useful video discussing the RFC is included at the bottom here. However, what if you do have a backend? In this case, a confidential client architecture is possible. Here we'll look at the authorization code flow and the client credential flow. As you can see, the front end talks to your backend server. That backend server is able to hold a client secret and keep it secure from both the browser and the internet. That server then talks to the authentication server, or Keycloak. Finally, do you need machine to machine? Client credential flow cuts out the squishy humans and lets computers talk machine to machine. Note this is OAuth 2 only, there's no IDC in this process. It's useful for things like cron jobs that require credentials to run. Note that there's no action, there's no user input into this flow. Now that you've picked your authentication flow you'll be using, the next question is, what library do you use? Most logic these days is handled by libraries. Very, very few people are going to code up their authentication flow on their own. Luckily for you, we've compiled a list of useful libraries for different tech stacks and different authentication flows. Note you'll want to check that whatever flow you use, the library supports it, especially if you're taking a library that's not in this list, one we haven't looked at yet. This concludes our introduction to authentication flows. Hopefully, you as a developer now have a better idea of where to start when implementing login functionality in your application. Further reading and links to our library lists are included below. Okay, so that's our high-level intro to the concepts. For a more detailed and in-depth look, I'll be passing the mic on to Nitin. Take it away, Nitin.
Great. Thank you, John. Uh, Let me share my screen. So hey, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about some technical nuances of token validation. This would be helpful if you're building your application from scratch. So before going into the details, I want to mention that there are tons of libraries for enabling your application with authentication using OpenID. So here are some of the libraries that can be used with different programming languages. So these are not limited, but there are tons out there. So I agree that making use of a library could save the effort and time, but it also comes at a cost. So when using such a library, we must ensure to follow some of the best practices, like the library should be updated and it should be actively maintained. It must implement all the important specifications of OIDC. It shouldn't have any active vulnerabilities. It should be popular so that we can get some support from the community. Also important to note that these libraries do handle token validations and many aspects of authentication, but it's also important for us to understand the logic behind these validations. So for sake of this presentation, I'm just using a public client. So if in case you're using a library, then in order to authenticate with a public client, we need these parameters. So if you had created an integration before with our CSS app, you will be able to download a JSON file with these uh, parameters, and some of them can be obtained from here, like the IDP URL, which is same as the auth server URL. The realm would be realm standard. Um, Client ID would be the integration ID or the client ID that you can get from the JSON as well. So the redirect URI would be the URL of your application, and for the scopes, the default would be OpenID. So IDP hint is an optional parameter. You would pass it only in certain circumstances. Suppose you created an integration with multiple identity providers, and if you just want to directly redirect to that IDP login by skipping the initial login page, so you just set the IDP hint with a specific IDP like either or BCID basic or BCID business to target specific IDP. So after you get the access token, the first and the most important validation to be done is to validate the signature, just to ensure that it is not tampered. Signature validation proves the integrity of the token. Basically, the token consists of a header, payload, and a signature. And signature can be verified using one of the JWK or the JSON web key. So how do you get this JSON web key? So the header section of the token usually has the key ID, and using the key ID, you can make a request to the JWK's URI, and then you can get the JWK. So after successful signature validation, there are also certain set of claims that need to be validated. And the first claim to be validated is the issuer. And if you're using a Pathfinder SSO service, then the IDP URL would have the domain loginproxy.gov.bc.ca, which would be the issuer as well. So you need to make sure to match that with the issuer. The audience would be the client or the integration ID. So just to make sure that it is being used by the intended audience. The EXP claim would be the expiration time. So you have to reject the token if token is already expired. The nonce is a random string that application has to send it during the authentication request, and it is received back in the token after successful authentication. And you need to match those two in order to prevent a replay attack. So another way to prevent this reply attack is validating the issue time. Issue time is the timestamp at which the token was issued. So when you receive the access token, it should be in this format. So I put in 3 colors just to represent different parts of the access token. The first one is the header, second one is the payload, the third one is the signature. And if you want to view the payload, you can just use simple echo and with base 64 and decode flag in order to view the JSON payload. So to help our clients, we have created a playground, a simple online tool which asks for a few parameters. So once you create an integration in our CSS app, you can download the JSON file and just fill in these details like auth server URL, the realm. Realm would be standard anyways. So client ID. And for the login options, you can skip IDP hint. You can add the redirect URI. Since you're using the online tool, you can just use the URL of the tool. And by default, the scope would be OpenID. And you can just click on update and log in. So you would get 3 tokens. One is the access token, ID token, and then refresh token. So for the security purpose, I'm just hit the GUIDs, but you can view the other claims here. So the link to the playground would be shared in the chat. So feel free to try it out. Let me know if you had any questions.
Thanks, Nitin. So I've kind of been looking at the chat here, and so now we've got about 15 minutes of open airtime for those of you who didn't post any of your questions in the chat. If you do want to raise your hand, ask your questions, you're more than welcome to. We encourage it. This is for you. And trust me when I say all questions are good questions. You should see how many times I go to the team with my great questions. With 61 people, or now 59, on the line, we do want to get some feedback. So Avneet, maybe I could ask you to get some people to put, if you could do the poll, because this is our first iteration at trying this. I have noted some feedback that was given in the chat. And so other than that, I just wanted to say, then I could probably lean into one of Leo's questions, maybe after I see the poll. So no pressure, Avneet. There's 2 comments I kind of want to pick up on. One is Leo's question, and the other one is Nitin's comment, just as our guidance as we look at JWT.io.
I just want to add a comment that our tokens would have the GUIDs. So if you use jwt.io, it's basically we're disclosing those GUIDs to third-party servers. We don't know if they are storing the JWTs in their server. So just as a precaution.
Yep, just an extra consideration. Albeit JWT.io, I know. Anyways, I will leave it there. I've used it too, so I now know better. Leo, your question, I saw that you had kind of asked of a couple different flows. And so Marco did respond. And so it's the first 2, client authorization code grant and client credential grant, that we're focused on with standard. And maybe pending the use case, we can talk through that. But that's more of I would say it's definitely a little bit later on, a more in-depth conversation. And I see the poll is up too. So if everybody could do that, that would be appreciated. We need feedback to know if this is landing or not. I see that user roles and default client scopes. We didn't plan for that for this session, but we do have about 10 minutes. I don't know how, Nitin, do you feel about doing something impromptu? I think I've got you on mute.
Oh, not that I thought think of any.
Why don't we hold it for a future session, Zoran? I think
Sure.
obviously this one was a little bit more centralized on, teaching the ins and outs of OIDC and OAuth, right, in reference to sort of how our service works. But there should be enough, I think, there for a future session around maybe the next one, right? We go through the user role setup and how to do that. It's a good idea.
I think because it seems to be a couple questions from our folks from SDPR. If you need a dedicated quick conversation before our next Open Sprint demo, just do reach out on Rocket Chat and let us know. Yeah, go ahead, Marco.
Yeah, Tim, good question there. And so the lessons learned from our situation on silver, right? That we've now moved to gold with the product, and of course all the hard work this team has done to basically consolidate a lot of those custom realms into the standard realm. And so we noticed very early, right, that there was a ton of teams that are making use of the custom realms in Keycloak that didn't really understand what they were doing. And they were really good proponents to use the standard realm, and so that they don't have to do any type of maintenance on the Keycloak side. We do have a number of them as it is right now. We're trying to consolidate in smart ways, and in terms of, like, if your ministry already has a custom realm, maybe speak to another team if you guys can integrate in the same realm type of thing. And at the same time, our numbers are still relatively low compared to what we had seen before. I think we had close to 90 on silver custom realms, and I think now we're only at like 20 or 25 or something along those lines. And so we're trying very hard to keep those numbers low, and that's sort of how we field those questions. When somebody's asking, we'll ask some pretty pointed questions. Why do you need it? What are you thinking about doing in there, and things like that. And if we we come to the conclusion that it is something that they need, then we'll move in that direction. Yeah.
With respect to sector-based approach for custom realms, not sure at this time. As the need becomes a little bit more, if we get asked for more custom realms, we'll have to take off our thinking caps and think a little bit more. But at this time, I can't speak to that.
I only bring up the sector-based approach with the lens of the BC Services Card and their directed identifier. And I know Marco Villeneuve would be very familiar with that. That sort of architectural approach was to put like with like as far as shared economy or shared natural resource or shared whatever for a reusable directed identifier for BC Services Cards. And if that sort of architectural plan or approach was to take root or continue to be supported, I think it makes a good case for sector-based. That being said, I know you need a custom for Services Card currently, and I look forward to the day that we get Services Card into the standard realm as a direct offering.
That's too, Tim. Thanks for that. Yeah.
I wanted to give Branko, we do have one repo example app that is tied to roles. Take a look at that while we come back with our next Open Sprint demo, or in the future. I have to kind of prioritize what the topics will be in September. But I do feel this example app, which even I have played with, so my hope is that everybody that's smarter than me can take it and run with it and do more great things. So hopefully that can be somewhere to start in that space. I'll do a quick check-in with anyone else from our team. Tian, is there anything I've missed maybe from the chat? Avneet, anything?
Yeah, I think I cover all things on in the chat as well.
Okay. Avneet, how are we looking for poll respondees? At least half?
Yeah, we have about 34 responses.
Okay.
If you guys have any suggestions, like how can we improve for the next open demo, please leave it in the chat.
Yep, wonderful. Nitin, John, Marco, anything else on your end?
That's fine.
Okay,
Nope,
well,
I'm good, thanks.
great. So I will stop recording this and I will likely publish this onto the Common Components Exchange site. And stay tuned when we make our debut to YouTube, folks. Stay tuned. Thank you for your time, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
So, thanks, team.